Eh? I'm in trouble.
But I am involved. We are all involved.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today we're here to talk about 1955's Rebel Without a Cause and its brand new Warner Bros. 4K Blu-ray that just came out. But before we dive into that, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, some tech and game reviews along the way, and now we do podcasts, if you're into all that, then this is the channel for you, and nothing helps this channel out more than by you liking this video and subscribing to the channel. So Rebel Without a Cause was released in 1955. It stars James Dean and Natalie Wood. It is now considered one of the greatest classical films of all time. It made James Dean a star, and tragically James Dean actually passed away a month before this movie even came out. But people still remember James Dean for this, East Eden, and Giant, but more specifically this. This movie is what made him famous. He became the star of a generation. Just a talented individual who never got to reach the peak of what many people imagined he could be. The performance he puts on in this film is definitely one of the best of the 1950s, and at the time it was not really as appreciated, but when you watch it now, he seemed like he was acting at a different level compared to everyone else. Not that Natalie Wood did do a bad job in this movie, because she did. She actually got an Academy Award nomination for this. So did Sal Mineo. He got an Academy Award nomination for this. But the only person who didn't in the main three stars is James Dean. But yet he stands above the rest when we look back on this movie. And that's just because he's magnetic. You know, the camera is drawn to him the entire time you're watching this movie. The way he's delivering lines, his facial expressions, he just had it. He was the king of the actors at the time in 1955. And it's just sad now when you go back and watch a movie like this, and we never got to see where he could have gone. I think people like him and Marilyn Monroe, that's what attracts us all to them, is the fact that we don't know where they ended up. It was just wasted potential, in a sense. And we never knew what the highs could have been for these stars. And James Dean is another one. And you can just still see its influence on film today. A couple of James Dean lines I've seen in movies recently, like just from this movie. Like most famously in The Room, where he's like,
You're tearing me apart, Lisa!
What?
I mean, he fucked up the line. It's just, you're tearing me apart. But that movie had clearly a huge influence on Tommy Wiseau, and clearly this movie had a huge influence on Damien Chazelle, because in the movie La La Land, not only did they go see Rebel Without a Cause, because Ryan Gosling is a huge fan, and you gotta go see Rebel Without a Cause, and he does that line, I got the bullets.
I got the bullets.
I always just think of Ryan Gosling saying it and not even James Dean saying it. And that's another thing with this movie, is the observatory there in LA. I've seen that place since I was a little kid in The Terminator. I always just think of Arnold there walking all jacked right in front of the freaking observatory. So I have seen this in plenty of movies over the years. It's like burned in my mind. It's one of those locations that every film fan knows, the observatory in LA. And you know, here it's a huge part of the film. You get the climax and the conclusion of the film there. You know, there's a scene earlier in the movie there. The observatory plays a huge part in this film, and it also played a pretty damn big part in La La Land. So this movie still, almost 70 years later, is influencing other directors today, and for good reason, because this is a really good film. Now, I don't think it's the greatest film ever. This is definitely a film of a certain generation, but I don't think it has aged that well, mainly because this is a coming-of-age film. It is dealing with people coming of age in the 1950s. It's very hard to relate to that in the 2020s, but it is like getting in a time capsule and looking back at what the youth was like in the 1950s and what their generational gap with their parents was. It just shows you that as time goes on, some things change, but some things don't. There's always going to be that generational gap between generations. You know, we're dealing with that now. You hear it. How often do you hear about the baby boomers versus Gen Z or millennials? It's still happening, and this was happening back in the 1950s. That's what these kids are. That's what James Dean, Natalie Wood, and Sal Mineo are. They are youths rebelling against their parents. We open in this movie, they're all explaining their home life and how troubling it is, and you can just see from all of them that they all have different issues at home, but they're all having the same effect on them. They don't feel comfortable at their own homes. They don't feel welcome. They don't feel like they fit in. And then that's how they form this little family bond. And actually, my favorite scene in this movie is when they are at an abandoned mansion, which I believe I read was the same house that they used in Sunset Boulevard and actually got torn down 2 years after this. But that was my favorite scene in the movie, is the three of them just kind of putting on an act. You get Sal's character, Pluto, just showing them around. And James Dean and Natalie Wood are putting on like this act like they're interested home buyers, and you know, he's walking around with these candles showing off the whole place, and just they're putting on a ruse for each other, really. And I thought that scene was amazing. That was the best scene in the movie. That and the last scene in this movie, which I'm not going to spoil because I'm sure there's people out there who who haven't seen this movie because, you know, as time goes on, these are kind of the movies that get lost to time, and I don't think it should. I think it's still a really good movie. It's not the best movie I've ever seen. It's not one of my favorite classic films. I think it's definitely interesting and fun to watch, and definitely, like I said, the most interesting aspect of this is looking back on what this movie did for other movies. You can see the influences on other films. One movie that really stood out to me that clearly was influenced by this as well was Ordinary People, which won the Best Picture in 1980, because James Dean's character's dynamic at home is that his father is a pushover from his overbearing mother, and he never stands up to her. And you know, and if you've ever seen Ordinary People, that was that exact same family dynamic there, obviously with a little bit of a twist. Again, if you haven't seen Ordinary People, I'm not going to spoil that for you, but you should check that one out as well. You can just see the influence of this movie on that film, which just came out 25 years later. So again, we're jumping a generation or two ahead. This is one of those movies that ends up in the Library of Congress for being culturally significant, and it is. You still see the influences today. You see the influences had on previous generations. You'll always see those clips of James Dean in that red jacket. You know, those clips will last the test of time, and that's why James Dean, even though he's been dead for almost 70 years, and people have born and died within the time that he has been gone from this earth, but people still remember James Dean. That's how important of a figure he was. The man only lived 24 years on earth, but like certain people, they make such an impact in such a short time, and he was one of those people, and rightfully so. You see on the screen what he could have been, and he just does a phenomenal job in this movie. And it's a movie I think you should check out. I think you'll enjoy it if you haven't seen it yet. But if you have seen it or you just want to check it out, we're also here today to talk about its brand new 4K Blu-ray that just came out from Warner Brothers.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
Well, here it is, Rebel Without a Cause on 4K Steelbook. This also did come in a slipcover version, but I opted for the Steelbook because the three big movies that they're pushing this year, Warner Brothers, for their 100th anniversary is this, Cool Hand Luke, and the Maltese Falcon. Now, Cool Hand Luke and Rebel Without a Cause got a 4K Steelbook, but the Maltese Falcon didn't. And I'm still not sure why that one didn't, because I think it's equally as popular, and clearly Warner Brothers considers this three of their most classic films to celebrate their 100th anniversary. These are films they consider to be landmark films for their studio, and they gave them the highest treatment they possibly could, and Rebel Without a Cause is no different. This is definitely one of the best jumps in quality I have ever seen, which does line up perfectly with how Cool Hand Luke's previous Blu-ray had a jump, and how the Maltese Falcon's last Blu-ray to 4K also had a jump. And I opted for the Steelbook for this, like I said, and it is a beautiful Steelbook. One of the better studio releases I have seen. You know, it's got this matte finish all the way around, but yet this gold around James Dean's head does actually reflect light a lot better than the rest of it, so it makes his face stand out. I mean, man, beautiful Steelbook design. On the back, Natalie Wood, also in a nice matte finish. You pop it open, and some individual disc design, nothing too special. They just changed the colors. You know, the Blu-ray is in black and the 4K is in this like gold beige, and you get interior artwork, which you always get with nice Steelbooks. And Warner Brothers did a great job on that Steelbook. Some of the best Steelbooks I have seen from a studio. Really nice packaging. That slipcover version also looks really nice, but I opted for the Steelbook, and I'm really happy that I did. But I feel like any which way you go, as long as that disc is good, you'll be really happy. And you know what? That disc, it's a huge upgrade from the previous Blu-ray. The previous Blu-ray is a pack-in in here, which is basically what Warner Brothers has been doing at least since the end of last year with Casablanca and their holiday releases like Elf, Christmas Vacation, and A Christmas Story. They just pack in the previous Blu-ray in there, which allows them to not put any new extras on there, which is always my biggest disappointment with these new 4K releases, is the lack of any new extras. Now, these are all classic films, so it's really hard to get any new extras because a lot of these actors, actresses, producers, directors, writers, they've all passed away since the release, so it really would just be film historians looking back and telling the tales that other people have told them. So it might not be that significant to add new extras, but I would really like documentaries looking back on the making of these films and what these films have done for the history of films. I just love that stuff. I really would appreciate that. Now, there are some little featurettes on the Blu-ray, nothing on the 4K. There is a commentary track, you know, so there is still stuff on there that might make people happy, but if you have the previous Blu-ray, you were getting absolutely no new extras, so the real big jump has to be in that disc. Well, I can honestly say it is a huge jump from that previous Blu-ray disc to 4K. Now, it only has HDR10 on it, no Dolby Vision, which does line up with previous Warner Brothers releases. They don't seem to love to use Dolby Vision. I don't know why. I always thought maybe it was something to do with their deal with Dolby, but this has a brand new Dolby Atmos track on it, which that surprised me because the previous release had a DTS HD 5.1, so I figured that they would just recycle that. But no, they actually put a brand new Dolby Atmos track on here, and it was pretty damn good because this movie is pretty score heavy. It does make a lot of great use of the audio. Now, it doesn't fix a lot of the audio issues that plagued this movie and 1950s movies in general, which I assume is just related to mic placement, where it just feels like there's certain scenes where things echo, and then there's certain scenes when the dialogue is overbearing compared to everything else, where it almost feels like the dialogue is the only audio in the scene. It doesn't fix that, but it is better than the previous Blu-ray, so I guess they did update the audio pretty damn well. It feels like they took that DTS track and just kind of added to it and made it a little bit better, because I did think that the DTS track and the Dolby Atmos track were comparable. I didn't see too big of a jump to Atmos, but the Atmos track is better, it is upgraded, and we always appreciate a nice, good Dolby Atmos track. But the visuals, like I said, this is in HDR10. This film is actually a big deal back at the time because they were originally going to shoot this in black and white, but because James Dean was becoming a huge star, they decided, you know what, we're going to do this in Warner Color, our new color technology, and we're going to shoot it in the brand new CinemaScope, which means they were going to shoot it in widescreen. But the aspect ratio back then was a little different than today's widescreen. CinemaScope was shot in the aspect ratio of 2.55 instead of now we get 2.35 is the standard. So those black bars are actually going to appear to be thicker on your screen, so the image on your screen is definitely going to be more condensed, so you might notice the black bars look a little bit bigger on your screen than what you're used to with usual widescreen, and that's the CinemaScope doing its job. And they really promote that in the front of films back in the 1950s when this became new technology, same thing like with Technicolor. They promoted that to separate film from TV, because at the time film saw TV as taking away from the film industry, so they had to make it feel special for you to go to the theater. So they got rid of the 1.37 aspect ratio that we're used to seeing, the letterbox aspect ratio, and they shifted to CinemaScope, and this was one of those big movies at the time. And now this 4K Blu-ray looks absolutely gorgeous. So much brighter than the previous Blu-ray. Right from the opening scene, just when you see Rebel Without a Cause and just James Dean's name pop up on the screen. Now, I didn't think it was the greatest 4K ever, because there are some scenes that look flat. There's scenes where you'll be looking at James Dean's jacket and you're like, it should look a little brighter. And it does in other scenes, but some scenes it still looks flat, and that's all source material. Again, 1955 movie. Kind of getting used to the new technology, so some scenes look better than others. But what really stood out were the dark scenes. They did a phenomenal job in the dark scenes, and a lot of these scenes do take place at night. I was talking earlier about that scene in the mansion. It's really lit. They're walking. It's like a tracking shot, and it's being lit by the candles that John or Pluto is holding, and the candles pop so much more on the 4K compared to the Blu-ray. In the Blu-ray, you might not even notice the candles, but on the 4K, those candles stand out. And a lot of these dark scenes, the lighting stands out. The ending scene at the observatory when they're turning on the police lights and the lights on the police cars, that stuff looks incredible. Amazing use of the dark scenes with the HDR10. I mean, that is what HDR is there for, in my opinion, is to make those dark scenes look crisper, get rid of the gray, and make it look like a deep black. It doesn't hit the deep blacks of modern technology, but for a movie that's almost 70 years old, this is incredibly impressive. Just don't go into it and try and compare it to more of a modern film, or even movies that were shot in like the 70s or 80s. This is a 1950s film, and the fact that it looks this good is comparable to like Singing in the Rain, which again, Warner Brothers released. So Warner Brothers has this way that they make their classic films look, and you can see it throughout their entire catalog, but they are doing it perfectly. They are doing the best, or at least the second best in my opinion, of bringing classic films to 4K. I think it's either them or Kino Lorber. They seem to be the ones that are doing the best job at preserving it and adding on to their previous releases. And this is no different. It was so incredible visually, what I saw on the screen. I mean, this is definitely one of the best classic film 4Ks. I think it's better than the previous two releases of Cool Hand. Actually, you know what? I don't think it's better. I think Cool Hand Luke is probably the best of the three in my opinion. Maltese Falcon would probably be third, but again, all this is source material and 1967 for Cool Hand Luke compared to 1955, but both of them, you can't go wrong. I think Warner Brothers has knocked it out of the park with all of their 4K releases this year from a visual standpoint. My complaints are the same throughout. I would have liked more extras. I would have liked a little bit better audio, but you know what? I don't have that complaint here, honestly. The audio on here is solid. It's really damn good. It's definitely not the greatest Atmos track you ever heard, but they did do the work on here, and it does show, and then the packaging is great, so I don't have too many complaints about this 4K other than the fact I would like more extras, but I do feel like now I'm in the minority in that. I feel like a lot of people nowadays don't care as much about extras, but it's something I've always cared about. I just feel like you get more for your money, and if you're a fan of film, you love love to go back and look at the making of these movies and interviews and just what other people were thinking. Even if it does sometimes feel like it's a pre-written answer to some of these questions, it's still fun to go back and look at that, especially, in a time capsule, and that's what this film does as well. So what would I give this as a final score out of 10? I would still give this a really solid 8.5 out of 10. I'm very happy with my purchase. No matter which way you go, whether it be with the slipcover or the steelbook, you will not be disappointed by it. It's a big visual upgrade over the previous Blu-ray, which is about 10 years old now. The audio is also an upgrade over that, which, usually we don't get that audio upgrade. Usually they just concentrate on the visuals, so it's nice that we get an audio upgrade. No new extras. This was really I'm taking points off for. That's just very disappointing, especially for a movie like this that is beloved by so many people. I think a lot of new extras would have been appreciated. Don't let that deter you. It's still a really good 4K. I can highly recommend it at the full price. This is, like I've said with the previous Warner Brothers releases, it will most likely go on sale this year sometime for about $20 to $22, and that's the perfect range for this. But if you are a fan of this movie, I can recommend it at the full price because they did put a lot of effort into this one, and I do appreciate the fact that this one got an upgrade to the audio where the other two didn't. So this does feel like a little bit of extra effort was put into it compared to the other two releases that we got this month. But before we get out of here today, it's also Friday, and that means it's time for this week's digital code giveaway. And if you're new to the channel, you're wondering what is our digital code giveaway? Every Friday, Matt or I will ask you guys 2 digital code giveaway questions. All you have to do is answer one of those questions in the comment section below. And if you do that, you come back to Monday's video. We put your name on a magic wheel. We spin that wheel 2 times. And if it lands on your name, you have your choice of one of the digital codes that you see on your screen before you today. And what are this week's 2 digital code giveaway questions? Well, I figured, you know what? We've been talking a lot about classic films lately. I want to ask you guys, what is your favorite classic film? I don't really have a decade before to start or anything like that, but just what, in your opinion, what is your favorite classic film of all time? And I know not everyone is a fan of classic films, so I'm going to ask you guys another question. And I figured, you know what? Evil Dead Rises is coming out this week. So I figured I'd ask you guys, what is your favorite supernatural horror film? Now, that's going to just take away all the slashers, so that's more in line like with films like Poltergeist or Evil Dead, the Paranormal Activity movies, something in line with that. So I figured I'd ask you guys, what is your favorite classic film and what is your favorite supernatural horror film? Now, you don't have to answer both those questions. You only have to answer one in the comment section. Then you come back to Monday's video and maybe you'll get lucky and win a digital code. And anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here today with me on another episode of Let's Talk. We really do appreciate all your support. And nothing supports this channel more than just you simply liking this video, subscribing to the channel, throwing on your nicest red jacket, slicking back your hair, and going out into those streets and telling all your friends about us. We'll be seeing you around.